Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost of the one true God, back with you with the next video in my series reading, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Without further ado, returning to The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, as read by Lord Naren White. I went off down to the river and studying over this thing, and pretty soon I noticed that my black was following along behind. When we was out of sight of the house, he looked back and around a second, and then comes a running and says,
Mars George, if you'll come down in the swamp, I'll show you a whole stack of water moccasins.
Thinks I, that's mighty curious. He said that yesterday. He oughter to know a body don't love water moccasins enough to go around hunting for them. What is he up to anyway? So I says,
All right, trot ahead.
I followed a half a mile. Then he struck out over the swamp and waded ankle deep as much as another half mile. We come to a little flat piece of land which was dry and very thick with trees and bushes and vines, and he says,
You shove right in the gist in a few steps. Mars George, day's what day is. I seed him before. I don't know yet to see him no more.
Then he sloped right along and went away, and pretty soon the trees hid him. I poked into the place a ways and come to a little open patch as big as a bedroom, all hung around with vines, and found a man laying there asleep, and by jings it was my old Jim. I waked him up, and I reckon it was going to be a grand surprise to him to see me again, but it weren't. He nearly cried, he was so glad, but he weren't surprised. Said he swum along behind me that night and heard me yell every time, but dasn't answer because he didn't want nobody to pick him up and take him into slavery again. Says he,
I got hurt a little and couldn't swim fast, so I was a considerable ways behind you towards the last. When you landed, I reckon I could catch up with you on the land, without having to shout at you. But when I see that house, I was beginning to go slow. I was off too fur to hear what they say to you. I was afraid of your dogs. But when it was all quiet again, I knowed you was in the house, so I struck out the woods to wait for a day. Early in the morning, some of the blacks come along, going to the fields, and they tucked me and showed me this place, why the dogs can't track me on account of the water, and they brings me truck to eat every night, and tells me how yous are getting along. Why didn't you tell my Jack to fetch me here sooner, Jim? Well, 'twouldn't use to disturb you. Huck, tell we could do with something, but we's all right now. I been a buying pots and pans and victuals, and I got a chanced and a patching up rafts when. What raft, Jim? Our old raft. You mean to say our old raft wasn't smashed to all flinters? No, she weren't. She was tore up a good deal. One of 'em, her was, but they weren't no great harm done. Only our traps was moss and loss. If we hadn't dived so deep and swum so far under water, and the night hadn't been so dark, and we weren't so scared and be sick puking heads, as the saying is, we'd have seed the raft. But it's just as well we didn't, case now she's all fixed up again, moss as good as new, and we's got a new lot of stuff in the place. Or what is lost? Why, how did you get hold of that raft again, Jim? Did you catch her? How I gonna catch her out in the woods? No, some of the blacks found her catched on a snag along here in the bend, and they hid her in a crick amongst the willows, and they was so much jawing about which she belonged to the most that I came to about it pretty soon. So I settles the trouble by telling 'em she don't belong to none of 'em. but to you and me. And I asked him if they're going to grab a young white gentleman's property and get a hidden for it. Then I get me 10 cents apiece, and they's mighty well satisfied, and wished some more roughs to come along to make 'em rich again. They's mighty good to me, these blacks is, and whatever I wants 'em to do for me, I don't have to ask 'em twice. Honey, that Jack's a good black, and pooty smart. Yes, he is. He never told me you was here. Told me to come, and he showed me a lot of water moccasins. If anything happens, he ain't mixed up in it. He can say he never seen us together, and it'll be the truth.
I don't want to talk much about the next day. I reckon I'll cut it pretty short. I waked up about dawn, and was a-going to turn over and go to sleep again when I noticed how still it was. Didn't seem to be anybody stirring. That warn't usual. Next, I noticed that Buck was up and gone. Well, I gets up, a-wondering, and goes downstairs. Nobody around. Everything as still as a mouse. Just the same outside. Thinks I, what does it mean? Down by the wood pile, I comes across my Jack and says,
"What's it all about?"
says he.
"Don't you know Mars George?"
"No," says I don't.
"Well then, Miss Sophia's run off deed, she has. She run off in the night sometime. Nobody don't know just when. Run off to get married to that young Harney Shepherdson, you know. Leastways, so they spec. The family found out about it about half an hour ago, maybe a little mo'. And I tell you, there wasn't no time lost. Sich another hurrying up with guns and hoses you never see. The women folks has gone for to stir up their relations, and old Mars Saul and the boys tucked their guns and rode up the river road for to try and catch that young man and kill him, for he can get across the river with Miss Sophia. I reckon there's going to be mighty rough times." "Buck went off without waking me up?" "Well, I reckon he did. They weren't going to mix you up in it. Mars Buck, he loaded up his gun and he's going to fetch home a Shepherdson or bust. Well, there'll be plenty of 'em, I reckon, and you bet he'll fetch one of 'em gets a chance."
I took up the river road as hard as I could. By and by I began to hear guns a good ways off. When I came in sight of the log store and the wood pile where the steamboats lands, I worked along under the trees and brush till I got to a good place. Then I clumb up into the forks of a cottonwood that was out of reach, and watched. There was a wood rank 4 foot high, a little ways in front of the tree, and first I was going to hide behind that. But maybe it was luckier I didn't. There was 4 or 5 men cavorting around on their horses in the open place before the log store, cussing and yelling, and trying to get at a couple of young chaps that was behind the wood rank alongside of the steamboat landing, but they couldn't come it. Every time one of them showed himself on the riverside of the woodpile, he got shot at. The 2 boys was squatting back to back behind the pile, so they could watch both ways. By and by the men stopped cavorting around and yelling. They started riding towards the store. Then up gets one of the boys, draws a steady bead over the wood rank, and drops one of them out of his saddle. All the men jumped off of their horses and grabbed the hurt one, started to carry him to the store. And that minute the 2 boys started on the run. They got halfway to the tree I was in before the men noticed. Then the men see them, and jumped on their horses and took out after them. They gained on the boys, but it didn't do no good. The boys had too good a start, and they got to the wood pile that was in front of my tree, and slipped behind it, and so they had the bulge on the men again. One of the boys was Buck, and the other was a slim young chap about 19 years old. We'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. I'd like to be with you all. Take care, and thanks again.